will be leading. Say it when we, there's only what the other, and the children can go.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q, networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house from Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good evening. Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radioland at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Q. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, the 31st of May, 2022, and it is in fact the 22nd Tuesday in 2022. Just about 7:35 in the studios at Q95, the big station. My guest tonight, Dr. Irving Andre, who should be joining us shortly. Political scientist Dr. Dion George is in Georgia. UWP leader and opposition leader Lennox Linton in Dominica. And Attorney Gabriel Christian, who is in Maryland. We are continuing our efforts at reviving the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among Dominica's Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean people. So the topic tonight is Mehul Choksi, wanted Indian fugitive or kidnapped Antiguan citizen. What is the role of our government, the government of Dominica, in this debacle? So here are some talking points for tonight, and I hope that my guests will in fact help us to unravel some of those things and deal with the answers to some of those questions. Here, has Mr. Mehul Choksi been convicted of any crime in Antigua? Is Antigua still trying to extradite Mr. Choksi to India? And if so, why? An Antigua report appears to support Mr. Choksi's claim that he was kidnapped in Antigua and brought to Dominica against his will. Did anyone in the government of Dominica know that Mr. Choksi was kidnapped and brought to Dominica against his will? Did they know that then? Did the government of Dominica play any role in his abduction when he arrived in Dominica's waters or after disembarking in the north of the island? Why was Mr. Choksi arrested and charged with illegal entry in Dominica, although he is a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda? Was Mr. Choksi's custody denied at the police station where he was being held? And how was Mr. Choksi identified at that same police station in Roseau following the revelation that he was in fact on the island and in their custody? Was Mr. Choksi held unlawfully in Dominica and refused medical and legal assistance for any period of time while he was in police custody? Is there any evidence that Dominica is involved in corrupt international conduct against Mr. Choksi, contrary to local and international law? What evidence did Dominica's Director of Public Prosecution rely on to have upheld a case of illegal entry by Mr. Choksi? And what new evidence is Dominica's Director of Public Prosecution relying on now in dismissing the illegal entry charge against Mr. Choksi? Did an Antigua police report which determined there was merit in Mr. Choksi's claim that he was kidnapped have anything to do with Dominica's DPP's decision to dismiss the illegal entry charge against Mr. Choksi? So these are the three of the talking points I'm putting on the table. I know my guests will have many more of those, and I do. And I'm pretty sure we will look closely at that Antigua police report and among other things. But Justice Dr. Irving Andre, political scientist, Dr. Dion George, DWP leader Lennox Linton, and Attorney Gabriel Christian will help us in seeking the answers to some of these questions. They will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous. Of course, no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, just and no divisiveness either. Just bringing back civility, a caring society, and good governance, recognizing the imperative for justice without delays, and the resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So tonight, the voices of the Dominican people, your voices at home and abroad, and the friends of Dominica at home and abroad will be given priority on what you see as a solution to fix these issues and challenges and concerns that Dominica seems to be persistently facing. So please stay tuned to this space tonight for another great debate. Get the answers to your questions. Whether you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, please join the conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say tonight, as you do every Tuesday, with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. So as usual, we send a huge shout out, hugs, and much love and appreciation. A big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers. We know they're doing their best and working under often difficult conditions. So please follow the correct advice and the guidelines and protocols. Please play safe and stay alive. So happy to have you with us tonight. We welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. And thank you again to our engineer, Sherwin Norris, as usual, keeping us on the air in crystal clear liquid stereo, and to Lambert Lambie Charles on the console at Q95, directing the traffic. As usual, Lambie will direct your calls to us. We make the people's voice a priority tonight. We will take your calls. So let's get started. And I want to go first to Dr. Dion George to put some of this in perspective for us. Because not only the matter of the Choxy situation, but let us take a look, Dr. Dion George, at this May 29th situation, what it really means to us. Let's put this thing in historical context, because it's a very important mark, an event, an occasion in our history. I think I agree with Attorney Gabriel Christian. I heard him on the airwaves of Q95 some time ago, saying there has to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission set up to properly record this, so all the younger generations will know exactly what occurred. Because if you don't know your history, you're liable to make the same mistakes going forward. So let me go over to Dr. Dion George, and so to get ball rolling, Dr. Dion George, if you could open your mic and let's get started.
Okay, good evening, Sheridan. Good evening to
Dion.
Yes, good evening, Lambie and Sherwin. Thank you very much for all what you do. To the opposition leader, Mr. Lennox Linton, to Mr. Gabriel Christian, and to all the listeners of QFM. Thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I would like to give a comment on some of the things that were discussed recently on QFM regarding May 29th. As you know, that my father, Clifford George, was a defense force. And I'm very pleased that Attorney Gabriel Christian recorded his name in his book. And yes, in South Africa, after the apartheid system, so many folks were still hurting. And one of the things that brought healing to South Africa, believe it or not, was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was, of course, fostered by the Nobel Peace winner, Pastor, oh my God, I forgot his name.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Thank you so much. Yes, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. But it was needed. It was needed to have that truth and reconciliation, because a lot of persons have been misinformed, and a lot of persons are emotionally sensitive to what took place. And there are people who still keep grudges. But then there are, as you may well be aware, all sides to a story. And some of the accounts that my father, Defense Force, shared with me, they were horror stories. They were horror stories, Mr. Gregoire, where persons were abducted from their farmlands, persons were kidnapped, etc. And my father told me that the Defense Force really had to play a significant role in combating that. And so, unfortunately, it erupted in May 29th in a very unpleasant way. But undoubtedly, this is something that will go down in the history of Dominica, and we pray that it would never repeat itself, right? So these are my comments when it comes to May 29th. And thank you to QFM for discussing that.
Well, Attorney Gabriel Christian, I mean, we heard you this week, and we also heard the leader of the opposition on the May 29th situation, but we did hear you very clearly. You did make certain recommendations. Not everybody agreed with you on certain things that you said, but we will never all agree on every detail. Everybody has to think from their own perspective. I know that you did quite a bit of research on this. One of the things that I did take away from this is, however, is that from some of the voices that were speaking, some of the past defense forces, what they seem to be saying is, listen, they treated us badly. We worked for many, many years. Some of us, well, they can't find anything that we did wrong, but yet absolutely no effort was made to pay us any kind of compensation. We lost everything, immediately lost our job. We lost all the benefits that we were supposed to get. Some people are thinking that there has to come a time when these people should be given some of that compensation, which very likely some of them very well deserve. Your thoughts, Attorney Gabriel?
First of all, pleasant good evening to you, Mr. G, leader of the parliamentary opposition, Brother Lennox, Linton, Dr. George, the son of my musketry instructor, Sergeant George. I always remember him, good man. And our brother Lambie at Master Control. I agree that the defense forces who had not been convicted of any crime or of any wrongdoing should be compensated. Simple as that. You know, we cannot enter a system of justice with a Peter pays for Paul. That's not justice. That's injustice. And so what we have to do, and I said to some people, I understand, I have to put on the historian's hat. After the shootings of May 29th, the anger that was there in the country made the defense force anathema to a great majority of Dominicans. And then the coup attempt of 1981 further solid the image of the force. But the reality is the force was made of about 100 persons. Only about, I think, a dozen or more, maybe less than 20, were ever indicted, charged with the attempted coup or anything like that. So what about the other 80? If 100 men were in an institution and only 20 of them were hauled before the courts and had their day in court and were found to be guilty of any misconduct, the other 80 persons ought to be compensated or given some sort of allowance that reflects the service to the state. Because at the end of the day, they were public servants operating under the auspices of a political directorate. And so where the political directorate may have misused them, they ought not be blamed for it. And where individuals were convicted under law, then they pay their penalties, and the others ought not to be tainted simply by association. And so I am all for two things: the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a sort of tribunal or commission of inquiry into any benefits that the former members, those who are still alive of the defense force or their immediate relatives, can be given for services to the state. I think that would be one way to resolve some of the issues and some of the concerns that justice was not done. At the same time, what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission will do is to address the real loss. As I mentioned in my program, Eustace Bellot was a classmate of a very dear friend of mine. We started grammar school in 1972. Albert Bellot, Panman, he studied in Cuba. His older brother, Eustace, disappeared. He was one of the many victims of the Dread War. There was a war in Dominica, and there were extrajudicial killings. And those extrajudicial killings have to be addressed, and the persons who can be found to be compensated for any wrongs done by government agents need to be also compensated. Because what we're doing is by instituting such an entity where people can come forward and you have a tribunal listen to what they have to say. And we have some sort of mitigating steps taken to either compensate or to record or to make public what happened. we craft in our country a mediative culture. By that I mean a culture where we are able to mediate conflict peacefully. In countries where you're unable to mediate conflict in a peaceful manner, your resort is to violence in the streets. And there are countries close to us, Haiti comes to mind, where they're always in disorder because they've never fully allowed for the institutionalization of conflict resolution. Conflict resolution in a peaceful manner is a hallmark of a mature democracy. And so we want to be a mature democracy. What is tragic about this government, and we have to look at what this government has done or failed to do, is it has totally dismissed the very noble practice that we had in our country of commissions of inquiry. I want to mention three of them quickly. 1927, at Joe William O., the 1927 Carnival disturbance, where Police Chief William Linton was dragged from his horse, and the famous Chateau song was created. Joe William O. say, "Descend nous descend, c'est mouté mouka mouté, pour la mort, descend nous descend pour la vie." I'm going up for my death. I'm coming down for my life. There was a commission of inquiry. Cecil Rawle, whose bust is at the plinth that at Goodwill, was one of the commissioners. J.B. Charles was involved. Carnival was cancelled in 1928. And as a result of the findings of the commission, Carnival was reinstituted in 1929. Fast forward, in 1956, police chief he had been in the army with my dad. I'll get his name in Humphreys, B.B. Humphreys. B.B. Humphreys was a British Army captain, was made police chief in Dominica, and there was a shooting in the Ban Mauvais at Soufriere. There's a commission of inquiry on the QC Aline, Queen's Counsel Aline, the father of Brian Aline. As a result, B.B. Humphreys was terminated as police chief and sent away because he was said to have gone on the exercise as if on a picnic with the wife of the Elrose manager and a picnic basket, and allowed his troop or his policemen to open fire in a crowd. A woman was killed in a home by a .303 bullet. The only reason I wasn't born in 56, the only reason I know about 56 or 27 was there were commissions of inquiry and their records. 1963, the famous Carnival fire, which killed Eddie Martin, the older brother of Arthur Martin, killed George James and Eric Shillingford. Again, commission of inquiry under Grenadian Judge E.L. St. Bernard. Scotland Yard came in under Commandant Slater. Testimony was taken. The only reason we could do death by fire was because Irvin Andrew and I had access to the written record of all the witnesses, of all the injured parties. Sometime during the course of the 1990s, there was another commission of inquiry when there was an allegation of bugging. I wasn't in Dominica then, but there was a guy called Gonzalez, and there's a certain attorney called Tony Astafan who was involved. Before that, in 1979, you had a commission of inquiry following the riot of 79 and into the operations of the Dominican Defense Force. I remember reading that Malcolm Reed entered the commission of inquiries hearing with a lot of swank, to use Colonel Martindale's words, with a lot of swank and swagger. I know Malcolm Reed to be a man of a lot of swank and swagger. But it also condemned Malcolm Reed because it said he was the commandant of a unit on patrol with a truck. And when they took a corner, the truck went into a small precipice. And Malcolm Reed was heard to have said, "Zafé do tout moun ki mort." And Martindale, who's not a patois speaker, who's from Barbados, tried to translate that, but you know, sometimes it's hard to translate certain things. The way he translated in the Queen's English was, Lieutenant Reed was heard to say, "It is the business affair of anyone who dies." Well, it doesn't really translate the same way. When you say "Zaffaire do tout moun ki mort," you mean, you know, to hell with whoever dies, who die. You know, that's essentially the gist of it. But if you translate, the reason I mention those things, and I can recall those things, is because there was a written record. And so what do we have in Dominica today? $4.2 billion missing. No commission of inquiry. The distinguished, intrepid opposition leader, Lennox Linton, uncovered the most devious act to pilfer proceeds of the public till in infamous bin bobble. They were caught red-handed. Lennox should get a medal. No commission of inquiry. On and on and on. The $2.5 million in Stephen Isidore's account from West Indies Power in the infamous geothermal case. No commission of inquiry. So those institutions that we inherited from the British, of being willing to subject ourselves to the law, of being able to institutionalize memory by bringing people before a commissioner under oath, taking testimony, and having that recorded, is of enormous value on a variety of fronts. It allows for the prosecution of crime, where crimes are found to have been conducted, or committed rather. It allows for the public concerns to be addressed, and for the public to have open and transparent government, because they see ministers being brought before the commissioner, and they see witnesses being brought before the commissioner, and they can then hear what's being said. And it also allows for those in the future who may think of stealing, who may think of engaging in misdeeds, to be aware that, you know what, I do not want to be in that situation where I am hauled before a commission and prosecuted for my misconduct. Absent that, Mr. Gregoire, absent that, ladies and gentlemen, Dominicans, we encourage lawlessness in our country. In the 20 years that Roosevelt Skerrit has been prime minister, he has not impaneled one commission of inquiry into the ambassadors who are crooks, banditti, mafiosi. Not one commission of inquiry into the geothermal scandal. Not one commission of inquiry into the bean bottle scandal. On and on and on. So I just want to make the point that when we have commissions of inquiry, they form the basis of truth and reconciliation, because you can't have truth in the presence of mystery, opacity, lack of clarity. You can only get to truth and then reconciliation, where you're open and transparent and people understand what has been done, and we're willing then to move forward to forgiveness when we adjust the equities. And so it's not simply about tradition. There are real consequences, positive, I might add, of having commissions of inquiry, which then translate into truth and reconciliation commissions, and there are real detriments that accrue to a society where the government is refusing to subject itself to the law and to the scrutiny of law enforcement and the scrutiny of the public that it serves. And so we do need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we need to return to the value system of commissions of inquiry.
Yes, absolutely. I think that I think it's very essential to have these commissions of inquiry, and I believe several of them are due, very long overdue, as a matter of fact. But Opposition Leader Lennox Linton, let me go over to you now. I'm sure that you have a few comments some remarks that you'd like to add to what has been said so far about the May 29th situation. This is really a significant mark in our history, and I think we really ought to record it properly. A commission of inquiry needs to be set up, and I think we need to make sure that future generations understood what happened, because this could happen again in Dominica. Because, so many things that, these circles come back and everything comes back in full circle, and it could happen again. And if it happens again, who knows, it could probably be a lot worse than it was then. So your thoughts on, Gabriel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, before Brother Lennox chimes in, I just want the public to know that there was a commission of inquiry by Colonel Martindale into the affairs of the Defense Force and May 29th. And we used that commission to do the first book, In Search of Eden. What we're saying is we need now a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with regard to May 29th, 1979, that includes in its mandate compensation for those persons who may have been in public service and may never have been compensated for their service, as well as those who may have been hurt, who may never have been compensated. It has to be both sides. But I just didn't want us to be of the belief that there was never a commission of inquiry. Now we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is a little bit different than the simple commission. We did have one for May 29th. Thank you.
All right, Lennox, your thoughts? Your mic is open.
Thank you, Mr. G. Thank you to the members of the panel. Dr. Dion George, good to see you, sir. Gabe, Christian, always good to see you. And Lambi, busy in the studios at Master Control, very good to see you. And good evening to the people of Dominica at home and abroad. Gabriel is strong on his recommendation for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what that means to me is that there will be a commission that will examine truth and arrange for reconciliation based on the truth. But we need to set up the commission. So who is going to do it? Commissions of inquiry in Dominica are empaneled by the president of Dominica. Part of the problem we have in where we are right now is institutions of state that fail us, consistently fail us, because they've been undermined, because they've been captured, and because they've been put to the service of the ruling party and its oligarchs. So who will set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Because I agree that it should be set up as well. Understand right now, ladies and gentlemen, who is the president of the Commonwealth of Dominica. The president of the Commonwealth of Dominica was the ringleader of the, you could say, the union/political party-based attack or response or resistance to the Labour Party government of 1979. The history that I lived through in Dominica placed Charles Sovereign as the leader of the Public Service Union, the Civil Service Association at the time. And I attended meetings at the parish hall. I heard Charles Sovereign on a number of occasions. I heard his exhortation to the crowds that were gathered on a number of occasions as to where they were going that night to teach whoever a lesson. I remember the demise of Louis Couz-Latigue. I remember the rain of stones on the Karam property in Cork Street. All of those orchestrated by meetings led by Charles Sovereign, the current president of the Commonwealth of Dominica. So here you had a man who in 79 was fighting for, quote unquote, fighting for rights and standing up and ensuring that the public service did not work and the hospital did not work and the police did not work and the fire department did not work, and ensuring that the country was shut down for a number of days until such time that the government was brought to its heels, because in his view at the time, the government was dangerous to the people of Dominica and dangerous to the region as a whole. But that very man sits today as the president of the Commonwealth of Dominica as a reward from the Labour Party government. Still looking after himself, still looking out for himself, still not giving a damn about the best interests of the people of Dominica. That's my truth. I have lived it through these many years. So where do we go from here? Because as wonderful as a Truth and Reconciliation Commission comes, it's not going to happen under the watch of Charles Sovereign. It's not going to happen under the watch of this administration. It is only going to happen if the people of Dominica find a way to remove this administration from office. Nothing good is going to happen in Dominica by way of us aligning with the truth of history, by the way of us reconciling around truths of history, and putting to rest the lingering difficulties and challenges and traumas of 1979. None of that is going to happen under this administration, because they sit as the beneficiaries of the manipulation of the public will and the public good that is serving them well and allows them to steal and allows them to lie and allows them to cheat with impunity, because that is their modus operandi. And it befalls us, it is our responsibility, the citizens of this land, to extricate the country from the grip of that tyranny, from the grip of that brutal dictatorship that is really taking us to hell in a handbasket. And you know, like I said, I was in Dominica in 1979. We were in DD Lane. That's where we were. All right. We were in DD Lane. And you were up the street, we were down the street, and we would be on the porch on 6 DD Lane conversing. Right. My brothers were up in Marigot, some of them helping to lock down the airport. I came to Marigot, I met them on the bed at my mother's house with rifles on their chest and so on. I lived to 79. And because I lived through 79, I have my own account of the history of 79.
Yes.
As would many other people who actually experienced what went on. But a lot of what we hear now arises out of emotions, arises out of the hurt and difficulties that people faced at the time. And the injustices. This whole question of officers of the Defense Force, the disbanded Defense Force, not receiving compensation up until today is wrong. You can isolate, as Gabriel suggested, the minority who were involved in these acts, unacceptable acts, misconduct in the force. But it seemed that we had a capacity at that time to address the issues of misconduct in the disciplined forces. Where is that capacity to address issues of misconduct in the disciplined forces today? The extrajudicial killings that took place in 1979, we have extrajudicial killings in our time. When officers of the law are taking the lives of people with no rhyme or reason, where's the investigation? Where's the prosecution? The only prosecutions we know of note these days are for people walking in Roseau, for people alleged to be involved with incitement, for people alleged to be obstructing the police. And under the watch of this child's sovereign character, you had security officers from the regional security system, from Antigua, from St. Lucia, from Grenada, from St. Kitts, from Barbados, descending on Dominica on the eve of the election of 2019 to commit atrocities against the people of Salisbury, the people of Marigot, and as the Prime Minister said at the time, to bring the hooligans of the opposition on the manners, to control the hooligans in the opposition. So we have these atrocities that are with us, to which the president of the country is turning a blind eye. The very same president that saw a danger in the government in 1979, a danger to the people of Dominica, a danger to the rest of the region, sees no danger now in $4.2 billion being pilfered from the public purse, sees no danger in setting up diplomatic relations with Syria, sees no danger in establishing a consulate in the name of the OECS on occupied territory in Dakhla, where people are fighting for their independence and their self-determination. We had that in 1978. And the president of the country sits and watches as all kinds of atrocities are taking place. People are receiving money, hundreds of millions of dollars from multilateral aid institutions and soft loans and grants to help people with COVID-19. The money is being spent. We don't know what it's being spent on. We ask questions in the parliament, no answer as of now, today. Last count in the parliament yesterday, $157.7 million received, 153.2 million spent, 104.5 million of COVID-19 recovery money unaccounted for. We don't know where it went. They have not been able to tell us. And we just approved yesterday another $81 million. But livelihoods are being laid to waste. People are losing their jobs. People have no money. People are finding it extremely difficult to survive in this post-COVID economy. The government doesn't understand. The government doesn't know because that is not their problem. They don't know what it means to be concerned about where the next meal is coming from. They don't know what it is to not know how the bills at the month end are going to be paid and so on, because they are awash with money, with the passport money of Dominica. They have no issue. The issues are just with the ordinary people of Dominica, and the struggle continues. And so, yes, we have to reconcile around the truth, but who is going to lead that for us? The person on whom we're supposed to rely is the biggest partisan in the country. The one who's supposed to operate above the fray of politics, the one who's supposed to lead us away from divisiveness into unity. That unifying figure as head of state is the most divisive person occupying public office in the history of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And we sit by, not wanting or not able to do anything about it. It's a shame.
Yeah, but Lennox, in addition to that, I think we must not also overlook the economic impact of that, the whole thing, because remember, it was not just May 29th at that time. It was like a 3 months event. I mean, the country was under lockdown. Nobody was working. The customs, the port, hospital, schools, nothing was working. And there was 100 and something % increase that was demanded and received for public service. Obviously, if you shut down a country for 3 months and you're not able to trade and do real business, obviously, it's going to have an economic impact, which would translate into some of the things that we're seeing here today, because obviously it's difficult to make up for that kind of economic impact on a fledgling economy like Dominica's. So all of those things, I believe, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee would have to engage in and examine closely, and to see that we don't, try not to repeat the mistakes that we've made, where we've made mistakes, because it's costing these generations here coming a lot. And so I just wanted to do a couple of things, because I know that we also might want to make a comment on the DOM-like thing before we really go into the meat of the matter on Choxy. But I just wanted to, before I do that, I just wanted to sort of acknowledge our folks on Facebook. Quite a few people have joined us already. I can already see David Johnson, David Joseph there, and I can see Penny Shirley, Michael Alexis is there, and Everlasting Peter, Carol Oliver J. Bruni is also with us tonight. Marina Charles is with us. D.D. Easter is also there with us. Bernard Aline is there with us. Hi, Bernard. And of course, the number of people are there, and the number of comments that are being made. We'll try to see if we can read one or two of them a little later on. And we expect many more people are going to join the conversation on social, on Facebook. I want to reach out and welcome all of you. Big shout out to all of you guys. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to take a brief comment before we go into the Choxy matter on the DOM-like, because this is recent. And I don't know whether Gabriel, you wanted to start off and make a comment on that, if you have any thoughts on it. I don't know if you have had a chance to listen to what's been happening and to study what's happening in any way, whether you know the history, very familiar history of DOM-like. You want to make a comment, any of that?
Yes, I want to make a comment. And the first comment I want to make is that I do believe that with regard to energy in small island like Dominica, that the people of Dominica ought to have the commanding heights in that sector. So the modicum of government control is a good thing in the way of ownership. Now, with regard to management, I am very concerned that the mismanagement of our economy that we've seen under this government will percolate surely but slowly in the way of cronyism and nepotism and corrupt activities into the structure of DOM-like, because again, the government now is the primary shareholder. And so this is a concern. On one hand, I am happy for any acquisition that strengthens the ability of Dominicans to control the energy sector So that's a positive. But the negative is my concern that the government of Dominica, as currently constituted, has demonstrated an inability to run the ship of state in way of the economy. They have failed to competently and with integrity execute on that mandate. And it's a concern that I have that we will not see now the stacking of the board of DOMLEC with all kinds of washed out political hacks who will bring into the body politic of DOMLEC the same kind of behavior that has been ruinous of other government institutions. Finally, I do believe that this purchase again bears the hallmarks of the opacity of this government. By that I mean a lack of transparency. It's important that the government understands they're public servants, not public guards or masters, that they owe a duty to clearly and carefully outline to the government, to the people of Dominica rather, what as a government they did in our interest. Not only how much they paid for the company, but what sort of evaluation process was engaged. Did they retain, for instance, a law firm and or a accounting firm that is skilled in assessing energy companies to help them in the negotiation to ensure that we got the best deal? Because one of the things I tell people all the time, even in my law practice, people come to me for a variety of things, but I don't do everything. I may not do tax reconciliations and tax appeals to the Internal Revenue Service. There are people I refer to for that. I may not do a zoning dispute. There are lawyers I refer to for that. But we have some masterminds in the government of Dominica that know everything. So those are the kind of questions I think that would be germane, so they can tell us what it is that they did, why it is they paid what they paid, give us this sort of gross anatomy of the negotiation process so Dominicans can rest easily that, look, we got the best deal. And I'll conclude, I'm sure Brother Lennox, whose mind is even more acute than mine with numbers, can speak some more to this issue.
Yeah, let me go to Dr. Dion George. I don't know, Dion, whether you want to make any comments on the DOMLEC situation before we move on.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's current event, and I will concur with Mr. Christian regarding the transparency of the process, and of course, it would give some accountability. But furthermore, I would like to give my own opinion as to how I see these things work. And so I would put a dichotomy of privatization versus nationalizations. And of course, with these two end, one considers, for example, if there were several private firms in Dominica that provide electricity, then we would have competitiveness that would bring down prices. Unfortunately, we do not have that. It's a situation seemingly where we have a sort of monopolistic sort of economy with the provision of electricity in Dominica. And so for a government to nationalize or to have most of the shares of such a sector, one would hope that, that they would be able somehow to perhaps subsidize cost. Two, that it would be managed effectively. Outside of that, when one thinks of management of any corporation, any sector, like even the Citizenship by Investment program, one would like to see this benefit goes back to the people, particularly in the case of DOMLEC, where costs would not go up. And so if one has to think of it from a business perspective, if we do not have more customers in Dominica, one wonders then, how do we manage costs? And I am thinking that perhaps maybe government could be able to subsidize or to put some sort of ceiling on the cost. Ultimately, the idea here and the hope here is that government would be able to provide cheaper electricity for Dominica. So those are just my thoughts.
Yes, and thank you for your thoughts. And as you mentioned, cost, I mean, it's not only a matter of cost to consumers of electricity, I mean, but people and households, it also costs to industry. If we want to attract industry, we want to really get productive, obviously, cost of energy is a major factor in any production operation. But then again, you mentioned the question of the benefit to the people and the privatization versus nationalization. And there's a long history of that we can go into in terms of even our own situation in Dominica. But I want to go over to Lennox because I'm sure you have a few comments to make on that. And what I'm thinking, Lennox, is that we cannot lose sight of the big picture. We cannot just think, all right, so Dominica is doing something now. Government bought, 52% or whatever it is of the shares of that Emera control in Domlec, and they paid so much for the 13.5 million for it. And then many years ago, the United Workers Party sold the shares in Domlec to the CDC, and there was a business plan that had to go with that. Certain things that CDC was supposed to have done. Whether we've supervised them over the years to ensure that they did that before this purchase took place, I don't know. But the big picture has to be that if we say that we are this country that wants to be resilient and sustainable, it seems to me that we should be moving towards renewable energy. We have made some efforts which have seemed to have cost us over $100 million so far, and we have not really released any energy at all for consumers. We were told when we got some support from the Venezuelans for quite a bit of money, $100 million thereabouts. We were told that we're going to have cheaper electricity. The problem is that we were consuming more fossil fuel. That is what we were doing, right? And Dominic obviously is a major consumer of fossil fuel in terms of what their generation. But Lennox, I'm thinking that the big picture is that we have already spent over $100 million on geothermal. And if we are going to go into really renewable energy, including geothermal, it seems to me that the country is going to write off this $100 million now as something that is lost. You just have to write it off, because if you try to incorporate that into your new cost, the additional cost that you're going to incur to get geothermal going or any other renewable energy going, the unit cost is going to be so high of the output that there's no way the consumers in Dominica could benefit. So it seems to me the government would have to totally write off that $100 million and start as though they have spent nothing and get new money and then begin costing that way. Your thoughts on the big picture? Because I really don't see us moving in a sort of a meaningful, planned, organized way towards the renewable energy.
Well, if you go back 25 years to 1997, when the United Workers Party administration sold the state's 72% interest in Domlec, they were selling at the time to the Commonwealth Development Corporation of Britain, the very same entity that a number of years earlier in 1948 had introduced electricity services to Dominica. So the partnership at the time was about securing an efficient, resilient, low-cost energy supply service to the people of Dominica. Something that the domestic customers could afford, something that the commercial customers could afford, and something that would allow them, therefore, to be able to have more cost-effective operations that generated more profits and allowed them to be more successful. Allow people at the same time to more easily take care of their monthly commitments and better use, more efficient use of their money. What happened at the time back in 1997 was that the government entered into an arrangement with CDC where there was a business plan, there was a sale and purchase agreement, there was a business plan that committed the Commonwealth Development Corporation, CDC, to specific actions over the years that would align with these goals of an efficient, resilient, low-cost energy supply. And then the government changed in 2000. Government change means a different group of people, from a different political party took the reins of government. But in this democracy, Government is continuous. And the late Pierre Charles of blessed memory recorded on the 1st of September 2003 in an address to the nation that there was this sale and purchase agreement between the government and CDC, and there was this business plan that CDC had signed on to achieve the broad goals of a more efficient, low-cost, reliable, resilient energy supply to the people of Dominica. And therefore, he was bringing on board with him at the time the responsibility of his administration to ensure that the company did what the company was supposed to do to ensure that these things happened. But they got into a quarrel very early on where the government was accusing CDC of all sorts of things in its leadership of the Dominic utility enterprise. And when the opportunity arose in 2004 for the government to take CDC out of its misery and get it out of the running of Dominic, the government let the opportunity pass to WRB. 2004, 18 years ago. Another opportunity came in 2013 when WRB was getting out. The government allowed it to go to Emera Incorporated. And in 2022, the government is announcing, finally, we have purchased the majority interest in Domlec, and we have done so for $13.5 million, which is $5 million and something dollars less than the listed price on the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange. Well, what does that really mean? In simple terms, people of Dominica, in 1997, willing sellers and willing buyers got together and agreed on a price for the majority interest in Domlec. And I'm sure you gentlemen appreciate the value of willing sellers and willing buyers in this business of transfer of ownership of assets and so on. You had a willing seller in the government wanting to pass on its 72% shareholding to a private entity that had the capacity to grow and develop the Domlec business. And CDC, a willing buyer for the price of $21 million, which placed the value of the company at the time at $29.2 million. Fast forward 25 years to 2022. You have a willing seller, this time Emera. Emera is willing to sell its 52% equity in the company to the willing buyer, the government of Dominica, at a price of $13.5 million, which places the overall value of the company based on that transaction between willing buyer and willing seller at $26.1 million, $3.1 million less than the value on the same basis 25 years ago. What does that tell us? The company has not grown. In 22 years, in the economy run by this Dominica Labour Party government, it was impossible for Domlec to grow. Its value actually declined by 10.6%. And now, the Prime Minister, who announces the sale finally, and he announced the sale and the purchase price and so on the 30th of May, okay? On the 30th of May. The sale went through on the 1st of April. So it has taken the Prime Minister 2 months to come to the people of Dominica and to tell them that he paid, and the government paid $13.5 million for the 52% shareholding of Emera in Domlec. What does Emera say? Emera said since the middle of May, first of all, right after they said they sold, and then in a management discussion and analysis report, they said that the proceeds from the sale approximated to the carrying value, meaning the book value, what they were holding it as on their books as a multinational corporation. And it now appears that Emira saw, the foreign investor, saw no future in the energy business in Dominica because the government had decided it was going to bring on board renewables and had invested over $100 million in geothermal and was moving forward with the plans in that regard, but was offering no space to anybody else to be involved in generation of renewable energy. So they were facing a monopoly situation where the government had taken over generation, and they would be restricted to transmission as the private sector entity in the sector, but restricted to transmission dictated on terms dictated by the government that, for example, Mr. Scared was indicating yesterday, the cost of energy, the cost of the geothermal, of the supply of electricity from the geothermal energy plants would go through the transmitter, and the company responsible for transmission would not be able to add anything to the cost that they were receiving. Meaning, how then would they be recovering their cost if they cannot mark up the price that they pay to the generating entity for the electricity? So right there, if you study that carefully, you would see the outline of difficulties that any private entity was going to have under the new arrangement with the government, where they had the monopoly on generation from the renewables, and they had the power to dictate terms under which this would be transferred and sold to the consumers. But where is the government so far in all of this? As you said, so many years later, over $100 million spent, nothing to show for it, not even a light bulb anywhere in Dominica being powered by geothermal energy. What is the Prime Minister doing? He is bitching and moaning. He's moaning and groaning about being left out, government being left out of the profits that Domlec has been making for all these years. And he reeled off an amount of dividends from since 2009 that Domlec was able to pay to its shareholders, indicating that the profits were much larger. And had the government not sold Domlec, then the UWP government not sold Domlec, then all of those profits would have been coming into the coffers of the government. What is the Prime Minister talking about? He has been in charge of this country and this economy for 18 years. And for 18 years stood by and watched the same Domlec that he is grudgefully criticizing for making profits that should belong to the government. He did nothing about it for 18 years, but he's blaming somebody else for the fact that Domlec made the profits and the profits did not come to the people of Dominica, when he is the one that for 18 years refused to buy back the controlling interest in the electricity utility, if that was his strategy for the sector going forward. So these little political games are getting us nowhere. And we really, while we wish the government well with this new venture, we really cannot realistically hold out any hope that they're going to take us anywhere, given the way they have functioned already with this renewable energy resource, where they have put all their eggs in the geothermal basket. And through the years, we have seen examples of corruption, going back to the days of that $2 million legal bill for services related to some drilling work or some exploratory work that was supposed to be done in the Soufriere area by a company called Dominica Power. Gabriel Christian? Yeah? Was it Dominica Power? The name of the entity? So the footprint of the government in this matter so far is not encouraging.
West Indies Power.
West Indies Power.
It showed up and it disappeared. And $100 million with it.
West Indies Power.
Yeah.
There you go. And so the footprint of the government so far in this matter is not encouraging. It doesn't seem to know what it is doing. And we will not be surprised if another 10 years goes by while the government seems to be struggling, trying to find its feet, and Domlec sinks deeper and deeper into or Dominic sinks into mismanagement and is no longer able to offer competitive electricity prices and services to the people of Dominica.
You see, I think the big thing for us always, as a nation, as a people, as people in management of an economy, the big picture has to be this. I mean, it is a good thing to become resilient and sustainable. It's a very good thing. It's a very good thing to reduce our carbon footprint. It's a good thing to go into renewable energy. It'll save us a lot. And it can really help us, if we do it right, to reduce the cost, the unit cost of energy, and make us a more attractive destination for investments. I mean, we have not been seeing much foreign investment, much foreign direct private sector investment in Dominica for quite a while. We haven't been seeing much of that. And so we absolutely need that. So a big picture, when you look at energy and management of energy, you have to see, well, what is going to be the returns from the standpoint of the household consumer as well as industry and your ability to attract investment. Certainly the households have not seen a reduction in their electricity costs. I remember this young man called Michael Coppel many years ago, Kaher. Since that time, he's trying to fight to keep the cost of electricity down. Many people don't even remember that. And pay a lot of respect to this man for that initiative he took, a big, bold initiative. He did not get much support. But certainly, I think this is a big picture. Now, the other side of it is this, that we really cannot afford to continue what we're doing with fossil fuel. I mean, look at recent events have to tell us something. We have to learn. I mean, Russia just decided to invade Ukraine, and look what has happened, the price of gas in the United States, in Canada, in the Caribbean. So it tells you have to have a little bit more control over the energy. What if we had used that $100 million and gone into use of solar panels, created a couple of solar farms? Think about what that could have got you. What percentage of our total country could now have been operating on solar energy if we had used that $100 million for that and more of the resources that we had to do certain things in Dominica? That just tells us something in terms of our options. But gentlemen, I do not really want to spend too much more time on this. We probably will have occasion to discuss it again as we go along, because this new investment of government is something that is here and we'll have to live with it, and we'll have to see how well it works out. I certainly hope it works out well and that every Dominican can benefit from it, every business, every potential investor can benefit from the prospects of what it could mean. But before we get into the discussion tonight on the Chokshi matter, I wanted to engage our listeners and viewers a little bit, and I wanted to go over to Lambi and to ask Lambi to let's take a few calls. I mean, you can run one of our Netcliffe ads, and then let's take a few calls. Give our listeners the numbers. And let's engage our listeners. I'm sure they may have some comments they might want to make, questions about Domlek, and also, So let's go to you, Lambi, and then we'll circle back to Dr. Dion George to start the discussion going on Mr. Chokshi.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Netcliffe, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean nature islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. Some reported $4 billion from the sale of Dominica's sacrament of sovereignty, our citizenships, are alleged to have been deposited in mysterious foreign bank accounts controlled by two men, a shady Lebanese operative and a lead policy director. It is alleged that from this fund, the authorities have illegally and corruptly paid the way for thousands of Dominicans living abroad to travel to Dominica on the eve of general elections to vote strategically to help keep their government in power. Even worse, this money, which should have legally been deposited in the consolidated fund, has allegedly been used for every purpose imaginable for the sole goal of allowing government to remain in power. As a result of this illegal diversion of state funds, which is publicly acknowledged, Dominicans have been economically brought to their knees, while large buildings whose ownership is unknown are sprouting all over the country. Our architectural heritage is being desecrated. One party mysteriously erects an imposing headquarters in the city. Foreign artists are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold partisan concerts in Dominica. Support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliff, fighting to save our Nature Island Dominica.
The Global View and Q, taking your calls right now. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. These are all local numbers. And the international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 96 and 97, 616-4257. Local numbers. International number 305-432-9624. And we already have a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Mr. G and your illustrious panel.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Mr. G, I listened to all the comments on 1979 and people claiming, well, it shouldn't happen again and it cannot happen. You know, Mr. Gentleman, my grandmother used to say, what you don't like on your step, you normally find it under your bed. Now, 1979 was used to remove a legally constituted government from office. Anthony Stefan, the senior counsel and the guru for constitutional law in the Caribbean, it appears, said it was by a constitutional coal wash brigade. Now, while a lot of people have their views on this 1979 issue, there is something that I would like to see. Frankly, I would like to see something like the National Guard return, because there is nothing more frightening than a police force that is supposed to serve and protect, used to intimidate, harass, and provoke the citizenry into socially unaccepted norms. In other words, they are propagating vigilante justice. So we need to have something, because police should not be attending peaceful demonstration with military, with battlefield weapons and outfit in battlefield clothes. That is not the role and function of the police. If you want, I suggest that we can have something like the National Guard, which is totally voluntary, but allowed to give their training and this sort of thing. We could use them in maybe help fixing a road, fixing a bridge, train them in such a way that they can do these things, that they would be better to respond in disaster times than police force harassing citizens. And I don't know what is wrong with our judges, our lawyers. Isn't it illegal or unconstitutional for a police to come to you in military battlefield weapon to arrest you or something like that? I don't understand what is wrong with our people. I'm not a lawyer. We have a distinguished justice on the bench, and of course, we have Mr. Gabriel Christian, who is a esteemed lawyer in Washington, D.C. We need to have something like, some kind of alternative to police, instead of serving and protecting, walking the beats that used to be done before. There was a beat from Roseau to Loubier, from Roseau to Canefield, then you go upper Goodwill. There were beats. all over. This is youth. You see them marching out. I mean, it was a pleasure to just to go stand at the police station, see them marching on to duty. I don't want to take too much more of your time, so let me round up. And I think basically we need to return to those days. But nothing is going to happen if people taking off the table the likelihood that we could have something similar to 1979, because that is the only how you're going to remove Skerrit and this criminal enterprise that he runs from there, and taking away our country, economy, and finances from Anthony Hayden, a Lebanese, Anthony Astaman, a political yard fowl, and then we have a Grenadian that is the advisor to the Prime Minister, Dev Bass, who Dominica has been caught between a war between Henley and partners on the one hand, CS Global on the other. The result was, well, you're all coming into it next, the kidnapping of Chusky, all because of a war between Henley and partners and Dev Bass, who controls CS Global. This is the result of our foreigners controlling our country. Dominicans, we have the talent, we have the skill, we have the resources. Let us get to work, retrieve our damn country, and restore the institutions of governance in our country, rebuild our economy.
Thanks a lot, Colin.
Retrain our
Appreciate the call.
and move our country forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the call. Lamb, you want to take another call?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good night to the panel and also the listeners.
Good night.
I heard early on there that Michael Coppel, he had a group, CAHU, and then that was responsible of high utility rate. Now, I was there in the protest somewhere around 2008, and you know what happened? It had about 15 of us, in the protest. And it had about 100 people in the line fighting to go and pay their bill. And the police and them was there, and they was not studying us. You know, the police was pointing gun on the crowd that was fighting to pay their bill. So you see how it is? And look at it now. The price of the light go up. So Dominican don't know what they want. And that is what happened at the time. Thank you very much.
And thanks for your call. I think Michael Coppel should get a lot of credit for that initiative. And all of those people who joined and supported in it need to take a lot of credit for that. It's a pity he really did not get the support that he required. Lamb, you want to take another call? Yeah. All right. So we can always take some more calls a bit later, Lambi. So anytime you'll just give us a signal so we'll know that we'll let you interrupt us to engage with the listeners. We really want the listeners' contribution tonight. I want to go back to Dr. Dion George, because we want to know, let's get into the meat of the discussion on the Choksi matter. Let's start off by putting this whole thing into perspective. This whole thing about kidnapping and all of the international laws and all the corruption and everything going with it. Do something for us to get us started, Dr. George, in this.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. And yes, so one of the things that I realized that this has been going on, this Melo Choksi swagger has been going on for a long time. And the thought that I want to share tonight is sort of deductive reasoning. I would like to apply some sort of international relations and then apply it specifically for what it means for Dominica and our image in the international system. And so I will go ahead and define some key terms just to put some conceptual perspective on the issue itself of kidnap and how Dominica gets involved. And so one of the major terms I think that applies here is something which is referred to as transnational crime, because this Choksi issue cannot be viewed from an envelope simply in Dominica. As you're well aware, there are other players, India, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, Antigua, and Dominica as well. And so by definition, I mean, there are a lot of examples that would characterize what is transnational crime, including, for example, drug trafficking, smuggling of migrants, human trafficking, money laundering, trafficking of firearms and counterfeit goods, even wildlife like the Cicero parrot or cultural property. All these fall under the whole concept of transnational crime. Indeed, transnational crime is not a stagnant sort of concept. Rather, it's very dynamic, which means that it changes often and it evolves with time, with people, with new tricks, right? And so if we have to look, for example, at drug trafficking, it says that drug trafficking continues to be the most lucrative form of business in international crime, with an estimated $320 billion a year. Human trafficking, for example, is a global crime in which men and women and children are used to produce sexual or labor-based exploitations of persons. That in itself is a $32 billion business a year. When it comes to smuggling of migrants, say, for example, someone from Mexico into the United States, essentially, it says here that in the process of doing this, a lot of these folks are raped, they are beaten, they are abused physically, etc. And so what are we dealing with here as it applies to Choksi? One last definition: kidnap. What does kidnap means? The definition of kidnap is an action of abducting someone and holding them captive outside of their will. Often, persons who are kidnapped are either physically abused, sometimes they are blindfolded, sometimes they are gagged with things in their mouth that they don't speak. To put very simple, if you have someone outside of their will, it's kidnap. All right. So how do we recognize that? The question is it a crime? Is it a crime? So, on the radio, people talk about criminals. Is it a crime? The answer is, in most cases, abduction is considered to be illegal holding or transporting a person without consent against his or her will. Most instances of this crime include force, threats to the victim, intimidation, etc. So the question becomes, how do we recognize that? So Choksi, for example, and we're on a public program tonight, and it was all over the radio. And so now that we have defined some terms, can we look at the Choksi issue and say whether or not it was kidnap, or whether or not it was abduction, whether or not it was illegal? It is usually easy to identify a case of abduction or kidnapping by the action that persons take. A person is taken out of their own will, resisting, and they're often slapped, beaten, abused. Often they use small boats or vehicle that are not easily recognized. The other section I want to talk about is, what is the punishment for kidnap? And if that's a clause, if persons in Dominica were involved in that, what do they face? Well, in international relations and of course in law, it says that for kidnap, sometimes the punishment can be life imprisonment. It goes further to say that if the person kidnapped is under the age of 14, the minimum sentence is 20 years in prison, and in some cases, even death. And so where does all this come from? Well, all this hail from a bigger umbrella term called international law. And of course, international law, as we know, existed a long time, and there are different sources of international law, like treaties and customary international law, etc. And so with all these conceptual definition and putting things into perspective, we have this key question. And the key question is, number one, based on the aforementioned definitions here and this conceptual framework, was Mr. Choksi held and or abducted outside his will? And the answer is yes. Question number two, did Mr. Choksi suffer any sort of physical, emotional, or maybe even psychological injury? Well, after reading the Antigua's police report and some statements that Mr. Choksi himself made, and looking at some photos, clearly he suffered physically, emotionally, and perhaps even psychologically. And the third question is, was Mr. Choksi initially charged with illegal entry into Dominica? And based on revealing of other evidence, were those charges dropped? And the answer is yes to both of these questions. And so, Mr. Gregoire, to bring this to my understanding of what is going on there, I said to myself, what are the implications for Dominica? Where do we fit into this picture? And so before I even give my opinion on that, I will tell you what the recommendations are from the Antigua Police Force. Consider this. The Antigua Police Force report is saying this: number one, that the recommendation is there ought to be a facilitation of investigation to travel to Dominica to interview and possibly record witnesses, border agents, and other local investigation for documentary purposes. Number one. Number two, the authorities are saying that also they should travel to St. Lucia to interview the tour operators and the original crew members of both of the vessels. And there are some other recommendations that I will leave out of that. But just to conclude this introductory statement about the whole Choksi issue, I want to talk about the implications for Dominica, sir. When we think of the recent issue with passports to Syria and diplomatic relations with Syria, when we think of, obviously, the invasion of the famine village of Salisbury on the eve of an election, when we think of the refusal, whether intentionally or incompetently, to implement the electoral reform as suggested by the OAS, CARICOM, and the other observers, and now, coupled with that and so many other things, to have this international, transnational crime that Dominica is part of, i.e., the Antiguan authorities are saying that, yes, part of the recommendation is to look into Dominica, travel to Dominica. Mr. Gregoire, it doesn't look good. It does not look good. And I am really thankful that we can host such an event so that we do not look at it from an envelope, but we can look at it from a global perspective as well, sir. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that perspective as well. You've placed it certainly in the global context. Now, Attorney Gabriel Christian, I want you to address your legal mind to not just all of what Dr. Dion George has said, but you may have seen that report from the Antigua Police and from the results of the investigation. You may be familiar with some of the facts of the case and some of the evidence of the case you may be familiar with, in fact, some of the statements that have been made by Mr. Choksi himself. Mr. Choksi, in fact, said categorically that he was kidnapped and brought to Dominica against his will. I believe somewhere in there, he mentioned at one time he may have been blindfolded, and I believe one of the police officers indicated that when they examined Mr. Choksi, he had some marks on his body. They did not see any signs of a kidnapping, but they saw some marks on his body. So,
Mr. G, you've been very kind. The most searing image I have, and I want at this moment to take a moment to commend the intrepid journalist, I think his name is Loftus Durand, who supposedly was the one who alerted the world that Mr. Choksi was imprisoned in Dominica. The searing image that I remember from either your website or Dominican News Online or some online service was of a blooded, red-eyed gentleman whose face bore the marks of violent attack, who then was later charged with illegal entry, but whose story clearly indicates a kidnapping occurred. The question that arises for the Dominican government and the DPP and the Prime Minister and his Chief of Police is what did they know and when did they know it? I'm reliably informed that before any plane leaves a particular destination, a flight plan has to be made. I'm further reliably informed that you only make a flight plan after you're seized of certain information to include the destination to which you're going and the purpose for which you're traveling. Without that information, one cannot begin to even conceive of a flight plan. The minister responsible for national security is not the member of parliament for Marigot. The member of parliament for Marigot is Lennox Linton, within whose jurisdiction resides or is located the national airport. I had occasion to see online a plane or jet of some kind from India. Lennox Linton, am I correct?
Yes, you are. Bombardier Global 5000 jet from
That's
Qatar
right.
Airlines.
Qatar Airlines. Is that an airline that normally plies its trade in your jurisdiction, sir?
I know of no previous occasion on which a Bombardier Global 5000 from Qatar Airlines landed at Melville Hall Airport.
Did the arrival of that plane coincide with the arrival of Mr. Choksi in Dominica, sir?
It happened the same week.
Now, there is a movie called Cinderella where a fairy godmother appears and waves a wand and makes a chariot or some carriage out of a pumpkin. Now, that's in the movies. In Dominica, we have a government that charged a gentleman who clearly was brought to Dominica by force, who was met by high officials who, it would appear, knew of his coming. Shortly thereafter, a plane arrives that Mr. Linton has confirmed to us is not a plane that normally operates in his area at the Melville Hall Airport, where Marigot is located. And Dominicans are sitting back after such an atrocity has been committed. What did the Prime Minister know? When did he know it? What did the Minister of National Security know? When did he know it? Why was that plane in Dominica? Who told them to come to that particular airport and when and why? And why was it the case that the folks who aided and abetted his illegal entry into Dominica were not themselves, as co-conspirators in the crime, equally charged? Because I have it on reliable information that Mr. Choksi did not come to Dominica on a, we used to go up the Roseau River when I was a child on the inner tube of a tire. We'd go to some place and inflate it and come down. He didn't come to Dominica on an inner tube or on a pui or in a canoe. I'm reliably informed he came on a more commodious conveyance, as in a yacht. What happened to the people who were operating that yacht? Did they throw him off and he swam to shore? If they came to shore and were complicit in his breaking of our immigration laws, why were they not equally charged as co-conspirators? These are the kind of questions that any kindergartner at the Roseau Mixed Infant School, where Marianne Linton of blessed memory taught back in the 1960s, would have taught us well enough to be able to answer. But because the kitchen was getting hot, because those questions that I've just raised for the world and the Dominicans in particular, to show where lawlessness is now ascended to high office in Dominica, because those questions have had to be answered, all of a sudden, they've issued a discontinuance of the case. Well, that case was as bogus as the case against Lennox Linton for incitement. That case is as bogus as against the case against Sam Christian for attempting to burn Parliament. That case is as bogus as against all the cases brought against people for marching around Roseau. It was a case that was riddled with inconsistency, that had all the hallmarks of state complicity, and so the state must now answer the question. Mr. Skerritt, what did you know about Mehul Choksi? When did you know it? We're waiting.
Well, thanks a lot for putting addressing your legal mind to this, Gabriel. It almost sounds like you're prosecuting this case here right there in front of us.
Well, Brother Lambie is at master control. And
Well,
when Brother Lamb is in master control, I have nothing else. But let us have a citizenry that's alert to our duties. Because you see, this is no joke. When these things are allowed to happen, they become commonplace. Then they become chronic. It becomes almost a cancerous condition that saps the actual will of our people to hold on to our democracy, law and order. So this is not a joke. This is becoming too commonplace. We already had the knowledge proseque of the bribery and treating case. Here we have the discontinuance of a case that would have exposed the rot where it resided. You see, this is a matter of utmost seriousness, and it needs to be prosecuted, and I hope it will be.
well, yes, and you said this is not a joke. But as I go to Opposition Leader Lennox Linton, I will ask him whether it's a joke when, for example, we understand that an attorney went over to the Roseau police station to inquire as to whether Mr. Choksey was in custody. And I understand the attorney was told, no, we don't have anybody by that name here. And then when the attorney raised the voice and Choksey heard, he said, yes, I'm here. Is that a joke? Mr. Lennox Linton, you probably have as much information as any of us here on this panel about the facts of the case. Help us with some of that. You want to turn on your mic?
Thank you, Sheridan. First of all, the list of crimes against humanity from the perspective of the United Nations includes enforced disappearance, kidnap, as Dion George was explaining a while ago, abducting somebody and holding them against the will. Then you have torture. And then you have forced transfer of persons. And we can look at what happened in the case of Mehul Choksey, where it is the view of the police in Antigua that investigated this matter. And the members of the panel will have seen the report from that investigation that is dated the 25th of June, 2021. Quote,
Lennox,
further along.
Can I just interrupt you just one brief moment? Lambi is frantically, making a signal. I suspect Lambi desperately would like to take a couple of calls. Lambi, is that the case?
Yes, caller, call on. Go ahead, please.
Yes, prior protocol established stipulated to. I mean, gentlemen, I'm very glad you all raised the issue and the context in which Dr. George put it. But let us not forget that on the night of the alleged kidnapping, there were two very important persons in addition to the Commissioner of Police allegedly to be at the Kempinski Hotel at the time. Among them was Bev Bass, head of CS Global, and our own Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit. Remember that night there was no Anupale. And I don't know if you all recall that Mr. Anthony Astaphan made it clear that Trotsky's passport was acquired through Henley and Partners. Thus, the war between Henley and Partners and CS Global headed by Bev Bass. And so here it is that Dominica got caught up in an international crime syndicate because two consultants for different areas of the CBI program were at war with each other. And as a result of that, we ended up with dishonest Sam Raphael on the other side. Because Henley and Partners asked him to go to the Honorable Prime Minister and ask him to stay hold off on Henley and Partners. It is also further alleged that Skerrit told him, well, go to Anthony Astaphan. Again, Anthony Astaphan. He dutifully told him, well, we can help you. The allegation continues that he tells him, well, you know, we can do that, but there are certain things you have to do. You have to go after the United Workers' Party, and in particular, the leader of the opposition, Lennox, Linton. In exchange, the allegation is also Anthony Estefan instructed him to write a letter to the court asking them to discontinue the $6.1 million case against dishonest stamp that he owed the government, to ask them to discontinue it for want of prosecution. The allegation continues that he was already told to do that. And Anthony knew that his friend Glasgow was going to be the judge to decide. So within 2 weeks, the matter was settled. But unknowing to Sam Raphael, the amount is still on the government books. So they're still holding it over his head. So he has to continue with on the other side. Because it is still on the government books, it has not been received. Any time that he displeases Roosevelt Skerritt, all he does is institute it again. Because we don't know whether it was dismissed with or without prejudice. But
Right.
this is just the context. I just wanted to add that part because Dominica got into an international criminal conspiracy to kidnap a citizen of another country. And the allegation is that DevBat was behind it all because of a war between CS Global and Henley and Partners. Good evening,
All
gentlemen.
right.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Well, I guess we don't have all of the facts on that, so we cannot be as conclusive as you. We'll see what evidence comes up as the discussion goes, and we'll see what comes of it later, because I understand that the police in Antigua do want to come and interview people in Dominica to get to the bottom of it. Lambi, did you want to take another call, or should we move ahead?
Yes, there's one more call in there. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good night, Lambi.
Good night.
Mr. G,
Yes, how you doing?
good night to you and your entire panel.
Same to you, man.
You know, I listen to the program as usual, and when Attorney Gabriel Christian was sharing, you said he's prosecuting the whole matter. He wasn't prosecuting the matter. I believe he was cross-examining the case, the perpetrator or perpetrators before the case starts or commence. And one of the things he said, I'm not that wise, but I'm not that dumb neither. One of the things he said that never been on my mind is that why this plane came on that day. This plane have never been in Dominica before. Why did it came? It came for some things, for a reason. Now, let me ask you a question, Mr. G, quick, because I know you're a lawyer by yourself. Is there any way anybody can fast forward any document to say this plane was here before 10 or 3 or 4 times before the day it came? Is there any way people could do that?
Well, I think the police from Antigua, they are interested in getting the answers to those questions. I think this is why they want to come down to interview people in Dominica and in some other countries who may have been involved in some way or participated in some way in the transportation or the movement of Mr. Choksi. Obviously, there must be a reason why that aircraft was in Dominica at the time that it was, and I think Attorney Gabriel put it very well. So thanks a lot. Yeah.
Okay, but I want to ask Mr. Linton a question quick, because I listened to him some time ago, and he said Plan A fail, Plan B fail. I want to know if Plan C fail as well. I want him to tell me. I don't know if you know.
Well, I'm sure he'll tell you if he knows. Lennox, did you want to?
Anyway, good night.
Yeah, he will answer your question in a minute. So good night. Thanks for calling. Lambi, did you want to take any other calls, or should let's go back? Let's go back to Mr. Linton. Lennox, let us continue, because it seems to me that we're getting to the meat of the Choksi matter now. So let us hear you.
Yeah, so as I was saying, from his arrival in Dominica, Mehul Choksi said to the police officers that he was kidnapped in Antigua, and he was tortured, and he was forced to come to Dominica against his will. And if you look at kidnap, if you look at torture, if you look at forced transfer, you're looking at crimes against humanity that's recognized by the United Nations. Now, the question arises whether the government of Dominica was involved in the kidnap of Mehul Choksi. There's nothing to suggest that any officer serving the Commonwealth of Dominica was directly involved in the physical kidnapping of the physical act of kidnapping that took place in Antigua. The suspects in that regard have been noted, been listed by the police, and we'll come to that in a moment. But there's nothing to suggest that any officer of the Commonwealth of Dominica Police Force or agent of the government was in Antigua and directly involved in the kidnap of Mehul Choksi. But listen to the statement from the police investigation in Antigua, which is dated the 25th of June 2021. It says, the further along this investigation progresses, the more the facts are aligning with Mr. Choksi's version of events that led to his appearance in the state of Dominica. The plethora of real and circumstantial evidence makes it clear that a case of kidnapping with broad collusion among multiple co-conspirators exists. So as far as the Antigua police is concerned, a case of kidnapping exists. Mehul Choksi was kidnapped and he was brought into Dominica. Where Dominica comes into the kidnap story has to do with the behavior of the police and border officials in Dominica who actually met Mr. Choksi on arrival in Dominica. He came in on the boat Calliope of Arm, the Coast Guard vessel for the Commonwealth of Dominica, went to the Calliope of Arm out at sea in the Portsmouth Bay there, and Mr. Choksi was transferred, handed over by the persons who kidnapped him in Antigua and forced him to come to Dominica on that boat Calliope of Arm. They handed him over to the authorities, the law enforcement authorities in Dominica, indicating that the law enforcement authorities were aware that this victim of kidnapping in Antigua was coming into Dominica for them to take care of him as was agreed in the plan with the government. And we'll see how that unfolds. So where the government is involved in the kidnap is not by way of direct involvement in Antigua, it is by way of collusion, knowing that the victim of kidnap was going to be coming to them in Dominica and to be transferred to the law enforcement authorities for them to go to the next stage of the plot, which was deportation to India. So when he arrives in Dominica, a series of things occur. Number one, he is met by the police commissioner and other officers at the Cambridge cruise ship berth. They indicate to him, the police commissioner, according to Mr. Choksi, indicates to him that he is wanted and he's going to be flown back to India, and there is a red corner Interpol alert out for him, and he's going to be flown back to India. In alignment with that statement of intent by the police commissioner, you have the Minister of National Security on the 25th, the same day, issuing a prohibited immigrant statement to Mehul Choksi, advising him that he is not permitted to enter Dominica because he's a prohibited immigrant, and the chief of police has been given instructions to arrange for his deportation. What that meant was there was no illegal entry charge up front against Mehul Choksi. And they didn't find Mehul Choksi, as they claimed, at Tukari Bay, sitting on the beach with a shopping bag in his hand. and looking as though he had marks from violence against him on his body. Right? That's not what happened. The discovery of Choksi at Tukari Bay, the concoction that they discovered him at Tukari Bay, which is testified to by Aline Maxime, was to cover up the fact, the truth and fact of Mr. Choksi being handed over by his kidnappers in Antigua to the authorities in Dominica, which makes the government of Dominica and the police authority complicit in the international crime of kidnapping. In order to weasel out of that, the illegal entry charge comes up where they claim, no, he did not come into Cabritz. He was not put on the Coast Guard vessel from the Calliope van. And by the way, let me observe as well that we read in the police report that in Antigua, the Calliope van that went into Jolly Harbor requested permission to berth in a certain way because they were expecting to receive a passenger on a wheelchair. Now, you only know you're going to receive a passenger in a wheelchair if the persons who have contracted you to make the trip to Dominica have told you that they have a passenger in a wheelchair. And in fact, Mr. Choksi was tied to a wheelchair and brought onto the boat Calliope van, right? Indicating that the plot to kidnap him didn't just happen. They planned it in advance and were able to inform the boat from St. Lucia that they had contracted to do the transfer to Dominica exactly what they needed for him. So this man strapped to the wheelchair is brought to Dominica. He is handed over to the authorities in Dominica by those who kidnapped him in Antigua. At no point on the record is there any evidence that the police had any questions at all to ask of those who brought Mr. Choksi into Dominica and who therefore would have been in Dominica illegally, as Mr. Choksi was. But they were asked no questions, which means that the police authority knew that the job of these gentlemen was to bring them the kidnapped victim, and therefore, as far as the police and the government of Dominica is concerned, they were doing nothing wrong. They were doing part of a job that the government had already signed on to in terms of the plot. So you are coming from Antigua, you're bringing this man to us, you have done nothing wrong. It is this man who has done something wrong, and we're going to deport him to India. Deportation to India, in the scheme of things, meant that a plane from India would come to take him out of there. And remember very well that at the moment of his arrival in Dominica, there is no illegal entry. There is prohibited immigrant. That is what he has been declared. And the prohibited immigrant is going to be placed on a plane and taken back to India. Two things happened. Loftus Durand on Q95 broke the news that Mr. Choksi, who had disappeared from Antigua, was in fact in a police cell in Dominica. And that set the lawyers for Mehul Choksi in Antigua to contact their associates in Dominica to inquire about Mr. Choksi in police custody. And they did that. Sheridan told the story earlier of Attorney Cara Shillingford on instruction from Senior Justin Simon in Antigua, going to the charge office and asking for Mr. Choksi, and being told that she could not see Mr. Choksi. But then having the presence of mind to speak loud enough and to mention Mr. Choksi's name loud enough, because he's right at the back of the charge office, and heard his name and said, yes, I'm here and I need assistance. And that is how it came up. But listen to this. This is the affidavit of Superintendent of Police, Acting Superintendent of Police, Antonia Moses, in the matter of Mehul Choksi and the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Dominica and the Chief of Police. Okay? Antonio Moses is addressing the matter of legal representation, whether Mr. Toxie was given legal representation or the right or access to legal representation. She says, on Wednesday, May 26, 2021, at about 1:20 p.m., I received a phone call from Corporal Kevin Paul informing that Ms. Cara Shillingford, attorney at law, was at the charge office and wanted to speak to Mr. Choksi. As Mr. Choksi had informed me in the presence of Inspector Derek St. Rose that he did not want legal representation at the time, I inquired of Corporal Paul whether the prisoner had requested legal representation. He informed me that the prisoner did not. Accordingly, permission was not granted for 4 reasons. Antonia Moses, Acting Superintendent of Police, is testifying in the court that permission was not granted for Choksi to have access to legal representation for 4 reasons. Reason number 1, that the prisoner had specially said he did not want representation at the time. 2, because his identity had not been confirmed. 3, because of concerns of his security and safety, and he had alleged that he had been kidnapped. And 4, that he had entered the state illegally. The testimony of Antonia Moses. All part of the scheme to protect the state and to carry forward these bogus charges against Mehul Choksi, because you had the testimony of Antonia Moses indicating that Mr. Choksi was denied legal entry for 4 reasons, legal representation for 4 reasons, and then claiming in the same affidavit that Mr. Choksi was not denied legal representation because mistakenly somebody at the charge office who did not get the memo allowed the 2 attorneys, Wayne Marsh and Wayne Norde, to see Mr. Choksi and to have a brief conversation with him. But once the authorities recognized what was happening, they quickly changed their mind and kicked both attorneys out of the cell. They did not allow them to continue the conversation that they had begun with Mr. Choksi. They aborted it, meaning that it was never the intention of the police authority to grant Mr. Choksi access to legal representation, contrary to what Antonia Moses states in testimony after she said there were 4 reasons why they did not give the access to legal representation. And all of that, when you take the testimony of Maxima that he found Mr. Choksi at Tukari Bay, which is a lie, when you take this testimony of Antonia Moses that no, he was not granted access to legal representation for these reasons, and then yes, he was granted legal representation when she's trying to take advantage of the mistake that some officer made to allow the officers, against the wishes and the directives of the higher authorities in the force. You see the concoction of lies within the police organization that ties the government into this scandal. There's also the testimony of Derek the Hunter St. Rose, the head of immigration, that claims it was not until Friday, the 28th, that they, through a driver's license of Mr. Choksi, was able to confirm his identity. In other words, they didn't know who he was until then, although 4 days before, the police commissioner and the Minister of National Security had announced plans, their clear intentions to have him sent to India. The plan failed, as I said earlier, because the plane arrived, because Mr. Gerard broke the news on Q95, and the plane arrived late. The plane only came from Qatar on the 28th. By this time, Mr. Choksi was already in Dominica since the 24th and was taken to police custody from the boat on the 25th. Right? And the Antigua police report names suspects. They tell us they tell the world who they suspect was involved in this. And they call names. You have, for example, Gurdik Bath. Gurdik Bath and Barbara Harabik, they place them at the top of the list of suspects in the kidnapping of Mr. Choksi in Antigua. And they also include on that list Gurjit Bandal, Gurmit Singh, and Leslie Farugai. Who is Gurdik Bath? He is the head of CS Global. CS Global is the exclusive marketer of Dominica's Citizenship by Investment program. And that CS Global company has received hundreds of millions of dollars in commissions from the sale of Dominican passports over the years. It was Gurdik Bath who took Roosevelt Skerritt to India in February of 2016 and arranged for him to receive an honorary doctorate from a university in the Punjab. They are friends, they're very close friends. Now, on the night of the kidnap, Gurjit Bandal and Gurmit Singh conducted the forced transfer of Mr. Choksi by boat, Calliope van, to Dominica, while Gurdik Bath, Barbara Harabik, and Leslie Farugai arrived in Dominica from Antigua on Executive Air Charter Flight 8P EAL, somewhere about 20 to 9 in the night, and they met with members of the cabinet at the Kempinski Hotel in Portsmouth. What did the members of cabinet receive? First of all, confirmation that Mr. Choksi was kidnapped and his abductors were bringing him to Dominica by boat for airlift to India as planned. And of course, they would have discussed and agreed with Mr. Bath the next steps once the kidnapped victim, Mr. Choksi, arrived in Dominica. So we see how the dots connect, and we see how involved the government of Dominica is, and the police force of the Commonwealth of Dominica under instructions from the government of Dominica, the cabinet of ministers. We see the specific elements of all that, the evidentiary basis of the government's involvement in this crime against humanity. So law enforcement authorities in Dominica were acting under the direction, under the control of the Dominican Cabinet of Ministers that had placed itself under the influence of India's governing party. I want to make the point that Mr. Choksi's issues in India notwithstanding, the accusations against him in India notwithstanding, the claims of the government of India against him notwithstanding, Mr. Choksi was in obedience to the rule of law in the jurisdiction of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. I'm making that point because in these islands, we have citizenship by investment. In these islands, we offer citizenship to people from other parts of the world, and they pay us for it. In Dominica, we say it's our lifeblood now. It's the backbone of the Dominica economy. And if not citizenship by investment, then what? So these citizens by investment carry passports from Dominica that in fact CARICOM passports. They carry CARICOM passports issued by Dominica. And we respect the citizens who purchase their passports in Dominica. We also respect the citizens who purchase their passports from Antigua or from Grenada or from St. Lucia or from St. Kitts. He did nothing wrong in Dominica. He was brutalized after being kidnapped. He was tortured. He was brought here against his will. And rather than judicial officers in Dominica seeing the logic of just an order to have him return to his home country of citizenship, which is a fellow OECS member state, Antigua, from where he was unlawfully removed and where he was already engaged in extradition proceedings, they ridiculed those who called for that order to return him to Antigua. But you have the police investigators in Antigua confirming the kidnap, and as Dion George indicated earlier, requesting facilitation to interview border agents and investigators in Dominica, as well as the British-based suspects. And through those things, you have the truth closing in. And then you had now, recently, the decision of the DPP to discontinue the illegal entry matter. And that, I have said, is nothing but a scarlet regime move to extricate itself from the scandal. You cannot tell me that with all that we see right now, neither the government ministers involved or the police officers involved did not know what they were getting into, and they were involved in it quite by accident. This was no accident. This was part of a plan that the government was involved in, the cabinet of ministers was involved in, the Roosevelt-Skerritt cabinet was involved in, and which they directed the police officers to join them in order to have the plan executed. Plan A failed.
So let's give you a little breather here. Let's give you a little breather. I mean, you've given us a lot more than a mouthful. I mean, obviously, Gabriel, as a practicing attorney, you know that a lot of this information, all these things, they would have to come out in a court of law where it will be determined what may be factually correct or what the court accepts. And I suspect Lennox and Dion and Gabriel that this matter will end up in a court of law. I suspect that it will, and we're going to hear the arguments made. So we've had a lot of information here, but I imagine that we'll have to wait. When, for example, Lennox, we are being told that an officer is saying that someone is denied legal representation because he said he was kidnapped. I'm not sure I understand, Gabriel. I'm not an attorney. I don't understand that. If somebody said he was kidnapped, you're going to deny him legal representation because he said he was kidnapped and you saw bruises or marks on his body that indicated he may have been physically handled or manhandled or mishandled. And you say you're not allowing him legal representation. And in fact, when you do allow him somebody tell you, hey, you're moving too fast, and you take back the legal representation from him. When another attorney come and say, I'm looking for this man, you say, I don't know this man, he's not there. And when you raise your voice, you say, yes, I'm there.
We are witnessing a tragic comedy. It's not funny. It's not funny. When you have lawlessness in high places, when you have the misuse of police service, that is the kind of thing that happens. It's a tragic comedy. It's macabre. The whole idea that someone says you're kidnapped, that is not investigated. As a matter of fact, the DPP discontinues the case, so they will not face cross-examination. Because if they were to continue the case, all of those things that we've illuminated through Lennox's outstanding presentation and Dr. George's outstanding presentation and your very probing questions, Mr. G, would be revealed, you see. The lights would come on, and the spectacle would be so odious as to raise a stench to high heaven. So, as with the Treating and Barbary case that was not prosecuted, you see, the wrist bone is connected to the elbow bone, and the elbow bone to the shoulder bone, and the shoulder bone to the neck bone, and the head sits atop of it all. They did not want the Dominican people to see the unveiling of the treating and bribery? Who hired McLaughlin? For what purpose was he hired? How much was he paid? Who paid him? Where did the funds come from? Why did he have a red coat on or a red shirt in his hand? And why was he before a crowd clad in red of electors? That case must not come to court, you see. Must be nolle prosequit. Because to continue it would be to unveil the edifice of a corrupt state. And the same reason is why this matter was discontinued. So they would not endure the withering cross-examination of competent counsel who would have unmasked the spectacle, the concoction, lies for what they are. How long? Lennox is heard to say not long, you see. How many more cases will be discontinued or nolle prosequit to further push down the field? The great reckoning that must come, that we're dealing with people who are crooked, you see. If that can happen to Melu Choksi today, are any one of us safe? We have people who are inspectors and superintendents and chiefs of police who are sworn to uphold the law, to serve and protect. Who are they serving and protecting? Are they serving the people? Are they protecting our Constitution? Or are they serving an oligarchy with its opacity, its lack of transparency, its devious scheming, which has resulted in a down economy, an impoverishment of our people? You see, there are consequences of those things, you see. Those things don't happen in a vacuum and you can go on with your merry life as if nothing has happened. No. When you have a society where people have tolerated inequity, tolerated breaches of rule of law, tolerated kidnappings, tolerated treating, it's a society where Ross University says that government is not a serious government. We want to deal with a serious government that is interested in education. It's a society where people who are investors in banks, for instance, will look at the trends and they'll say, look, the trends are troubling. We don't want to risk our time and money here. So Dominican people, there are consequences. This is not a Lennox Linton thing or UWP. Understand, if we are careful about our country and we love our country and we love democracy, we love fairness, we must act like we do. And we must stand up and demand action. And where our government does not provide action, then change must be made to that government. Unless that is done, we will continue to witness the degradation of our policing, the destruction of our institutions, and the evisceration of rule of law. So Melu Choksi and the discontinuance of his case, as with the nolle prosequit of the bribery and treating case, are but metaphors, or rather they're symbolic of the rut into which we've descended. Take my word. No, strike that. Take the DPP's word, because those are the things that she has done. I'll rest my case at this point in time.
Well, yes, and I know that we have to take another break shortly, but before we take a break, I just wanted to go back to Dr. Dion George for his further comments on this. Dr. George?
Yes, well, I think thanks very much to Mr. Lennox Linton. Very, very complete, very detailed overview of what happened. You know, really bring it into context of all the different swagger that's going on concerning that case. And of course, Mr. Gabriel Christian and bringing the whole issue outside of the envelope of simply a Choksi matter, but to bring it toward the whole understanding of our democracy or lack thereof. And so on that note, I would also bring up the image of Dominica in the international community. And I think the damage of what is really happening for the rule of law, again, not just within Dominica, but as we spoke earlier, transnationally. And so coupled with the whole idea, Mr. Gregoire, of the plethora of questions concerning the rule of law, even the whole electoral laws. I mean, if I may just say, I think you're aware, last week I have to give my apology for not being able to make the show because I was actually at an election, primary elections in Georgia. And interestingly, I mean, they just had the whole issue of voters' ID, etc., and of course the Republicans controlling the House in Georgia. And within 18 months, they were able to implement new laws concerning that. And of course, I served as a manager at one of the precincts there. But I mentioned that simply because, I mean, can you imagine how long has it been since all the international observers has recommended for Dominica these changes which are required? In fact, they said straight off the bat that the election is not fair. It was in the report. And what they meant by that, obviously, is that it's imbalanced in terms of what the opposition have compared to what the incumbent has. And just this litany of things, Mr. Gregoire, I think what Gabriel says should be bolded. The whole idea that we have to fight for democracy. And there is a book called Common Sense by Thomas Paine, I believe. And essentially it speaks towards that if a government does not work for the will of the people and for the essence of what people elect that government for, Thomas Jefferson said it best, that we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all of us are equal and with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government were to abridge those rights, it is the responsibility of the people to elect a new one. Thank you.
And I suspect that Attorney Gabriel would like to make a further comment on that book, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, and how it relates to our situation here. It's our situation in Dominica.
I smile because that was the book, the first book that Rosie Douglas gave me was Common Sense. I actually have a copy downstairs in honor of him. It was at the home of Mike Douglas. He'd just been deported from Canada. And I always see Rosie never took us out of school. He always wanted to know we were studying, we were reading, we were writing. And so it's interesting that Brother Dion mentions that book. Thomas Paine was the pamphleteer of the American Revolution. He was almost sort of the essayist, the one who would render in writing the thoughts and the feelings and the desires of the Americans in the 13 colonies who were chafing under the rule of Britain with the call, no taxation without representation. Well, that's what we have now in Dominica, frankly. Do we have representation? If representation is supposed to be that you govern in the public interest, and you govern with the consent of those who elected you, and that your responsibility is not to yourself and your friends and your cronies, or Anthony Hayden. Who elected Anthony Hayden? Lennox Linton. Do you know who elected him? Is he a Dominican? Is that his real name? How did he come to be someone who got the biggest contract in the history of our country without tender, in violation of the Procurement Act? How did that happen? You see. So that's what Thomas Paine talked about. Governance in the public interest. No taxation without representation. And I posit tonight that we are in that situation now. We are being taxed by a government, using public funds to perpetuate itself in power, profit from that power for its friends and its family in a way that's a disservice to the public interest and the national interest of the Commonwealth of Dominica.
Lennox, we have to take a little break and go over to Lambie, but I was wondering whether you wanted to make any further brief comment before we went back to Lambie.
To the points that Gabriel was making, I had occasion in the Parliament of Dominica yesterday to quote the Cuban philosopher and freedom fighter, father of independence in Cuba, Jose Marti, who told us many moons ago that, quote, to use for exclusive benefit what is not ours is theft, He who uses the office he owes to the voters wrongfully and against them is a thief, and he who receives money in trust to administer for the benefit of its owner and uses it either for his own interest or against the wishes of its rightful owner is a thief. So I say that in respect to Gabriel's concerns about the resources of Dominica that are hither, thither, and yon under the control of people who were not elected by the people to serve them, but who have carte blanche to do as they please with the resources of the state because they were given those access to those resources and authority to do as they please with them by those who owe to the voters the office that they hold and are using that office wrongfully and against the voters. Therefore, they are thieves. And it is these thieves who are involved in this plot to kidnap Mehul Choksi in Antigua, bring him to Dominica, and then send him back to India, where what they're doing is circumventing a legal process that's already engaged, where India, with respect to certain accusations that have been made against Mehul Choksi, want him returned to India to face those charges. And it is interesting that, let me just go back to something that we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about testimonies before the court and the testimony of Sergeant Aline Maxime, right? For example, it was the testimony of Maxime that, quote here, there was no sign. Remember, Mr. Choksi says he was kidnapped. So he told Aline Maxime that he was kidnapped and he was brought here on a boat, right? Aline Maxime responds in testimony before the court, quote, there was no sign of any alleged kidnapping, nor any alleged boat. However, as he alleged that he was kidnapped, I asked him whether he needed medical assistance as I observed what appeared to be injuries on his body. Yes, Sergeant Maxime, there were injuries on his body. You would have seen the bloody eyes, like we all saw in the photographs that were taken in the pictures of him in the police cell, right? But you're admitting that there were marks on his body, but you're saying there was no sign of any alleged kidnapping. What exactly does that mean? No, any alleged boat. He came here on a boat from Antigua. That cannot be denied. So in all these submissions from the police officers, you see the scheme of the scheme that operated, and where police officers were willing to lie in the court, perjure themselves in order to protect the administration from what they felt would have been legitimate claims against them for the involvement in international criminality. And you also have the statement of Antonia Moses, right? Very interesting. She says later in the evening of the 26th, it was? Yeah, 26th of May. Later in the evening of the 26th of May, at about 6 p.m., and as part of the investigation into the matter of Mr. Choksi's arrest and his repeated request to return to Antigua, I accompanied Inspector St. Rose to visit the prisoner to obtain a written consent to return to Antigua. It was during that visit that he informed me that he would speak to Ms. Cara Shillingford. The testimony of Mehul Choksi is that, yes, they brought a form for him to sign, but nowhere on the form did it say he was going to Antigua, and so he did not trust the police officers because he felt they were trying to trick him. The evidence that these police officers brought before the court clearly confirmed that they were involved in a plot against Choksi and therefore would be trying to trick and deceive him. So he was correct. The form he was going to sign would have given permission for him to leave. And of course, there was the plane waiting at Melville Hall that was supposed to be at Melville Hall, on which they would put him and send him at the time back to to India, where what he wanted to do was to go to Antigua, his place of residence under the economic citizenship program of Antigua, where he was lawfully residing and where he was already involved in extradition proceedings based on a request from India.
So
this government is a danger to Dominica, it's a danger to the Caribbean, it's a danger to the world community.
So Lennox, Linton, we are going to take a few calls. We'll go over to Lambie, but I just wanted to note this as we just to stick a pin right there. I believe the opposition did strongly recommend that Mr. Choksi be returned to Antigua. It seems as if the DPP ultimately decided that that was the best thing to do and return Mr.
Well, that was 1 year ago. 1 year ago, we said clearly that this gentleman did nothing wrong in Dominica. He had no business in the courts of Dominica. He was in an OECS territory under the jurisdiction of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, which is an agency of the OECS government. And we were asking the question, what is he doing in Dominica? How can you claim false entry, illegal entry to Dominica by a citizen from Antigua and Barbuda? Well, you claim he didn't come in at an approved point of entry, but that is a lie. He came in, you, the law enforcement authority in Dominica, brought him into Dominica. You brought him in through the Cabrit's cruise ship berth, having taken him from his kidnappers aboard the Calliope of Arne. So what is this bogus charge of illegal entry? And we said a year ago that this gentleman should be returned to Antigua. Let him go back to his place of residence, an OECS country. He held citizenship, economic citizenship in Antigua, and he was before the court in Antigua, part of the jurisdiction of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, on this extradition matter, and also facing charges in Antigua where the government was trying to revoke his citizenship. All those matters were before the court in Antigua, the jurisdiction of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, and we were trying to circumvent that because India felt that too much time was going by and they wanted him back there. And then we go and we collude with agents of the Indian government, Gurdip Bath or whoever else, or the government itself, and decide to get involved in this international criminality. It's disgraceful.
Yes, of course. And all of this, as I said earlier, I suspect will have to be proved in a court of law, because I suspect that case is headed for a court of law. Lambie, I know you have some calls, but I noticed that Dr.
Well, Sheridan, I noticed that you're insisting, as the good host you are, on proof. But what we're talking about tonight, and I did take the trouble of making sure that I have the affidavits of the police officers before me, so we can see what they've actually said. It is from those affidavits and testimony that we are divining criminality by the government of Dominica, who had the police officers under instruction as to what they should do.
Dr. George, I noticed that you seem to have indicated a moment ago that you wanted to make a contribution there.
Well, yes. I just wanted to even embold even further some of the things that Mr. Linton was saying a while ago, because I think I left it out in my earlier presentation. And I think it's worth mentioning for the public to understand the severity of this. One of the recommendations, sir, that the Antiguan police is suggesting is this, that some of the persons mentioned, like, for example, Ms. Bath and Barbara, etc., Etla, that the Antiguan government is saying that they would like Interpol to identify the location of those folks and possibly have them returned for questioning. And for the listening public who want to know what Interpol is, it's the International Criminal Police Organization to interview those folks. And so again, it just brings back the point that this is not something enveloped in just Dominica, but this is really something that deals with international organizations, and this is some high-level severity. I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, I have no doubts that with all what has been said by yourself, Dr. George, and Attorney Gabriel Christian, and Opposition Leader Lennox Linton, There is absolutely no doubt in any of our minds that is a very serious matter. And obviously, the police in Antigua are saying this is a very serious matter, and we would like to be out there and investigate and question people who may have been involved in it. In fact, once they start saying in their report, once they found that there is merit in Mr. Choksi's claim that he was kidnapped, I mean, what else do you want to know? Because they're saying, yes, I agree with this man, he was kidnapped. That's a major international problem right there. So, Lambi, let's go back to you for a minute and take a couple of calls. When we get back, we will make the round with our panelists, see if we can start wrapping up. Pretty sure there's a lot more to say, but we'll hopefully our callers might call and participate, and we can then have a dialogue with them. Over to you, Lambi.
Been kept you here so long, you left and you came back. So you can go right ahead with your call now.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, distinguished gentlemen.
Good evening.
Mr. Linton just read something interesting. Something to do with, I'm just paraphrasing. Apparently, the gentleman's body appeared to have injuries. So even the bodily harm is considered to be fake. I'm just asking a question.
Good question. Good question, Lambi.
It is the police officer, it is the investigating police officer who claims in testimony that he saw injuries on the body of Choksi. That's his testimony.
But I believe, Lennox, that Mr. Choksi himself also claimed that he was manhandled. And the pictures obviously
Yes,
show the evidence.
he claimed from day one. He claimed from
Right.
day one that he was kidnapped, he was tortured, he was beaten, he was tasered repeatedly over his body to keep him quiet as he made the trip down to Dominica, where he was smuggled into the hands of the authorities.
So clearly, I mean, this is what he said, and that's why I believe this matter will end up in a court. Lambi, let's go to you. Take a break, and you want to just run on a little ads, and then you can take a couple of calls.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, but just to be clear on this matter of where he entered, because we did indicate a while ago that Mr. Choksi claimed that he was taken from the Calliope van that brought him into Dominica. He was taken by officers aboard a Coast Guard vessel to the Cambridge cruise ship berth. Okay. Now, the DPP relied on the untrue statements of Sergeant Alain Maxime that he found and arrested Mr. Choksi at Tukari Bay, when in fact, according to pictures, and these pictures are leaked by police officers, to Mass in the Cemetery. Mass in the Cemetery subsequently published the picture of Mr. Choksi at the Cambridge cruise ship berth, which confirms that is where he came in. They didn't find him on any Tukari beach, but they used the false statements of Sergeant Maxime to cover up evidence that confirmed the involvement of the scared regime in this kidnapping scandal. Number one, and I said this before, but it's worth repeating, you had the handover at sea of Mehul Choksi to Dominica Border Patrol officials by those who kidnapped him in Antigua, tortured him, and ferried him to Dominica against his will. And secondly, when he arrived in Dominica, you had the presence of the police chief at the Cambridge cruise ship berth on May 24th to receive him and to tell him that he was going to be sent back to India. How did the chief of police, know that he was supposed to be at the Cambridge on the 24th, meeting a man called Mehul Choksi that he has to send back to India? Where did he get the information from? The police in Antigua didn't know that Mehul Choksi had disappeared. They had received a report at the time that his wife said they could not find him, he had not returned home. How did Lincoln Corbett know that Mehul Choksi was going to be at the Cambridge cruise ship berth if it was not by prior contact with or prior contract through the government that seemed to have been involved with the kidnappers and had knowledge of what was going on, to the point where they were waiting at the Kempinski Hotel in Portsmouth for the kidnappers to arrive and for them to receive their instructions and next steps.
All right, Lambi, let's go over to you.
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good
I think
evening.
it's important that we look at the first statement or listen to the first statement that Prime Minister Gaston Brong made in reference to this incident with Mr. Choksky. And then I am wondering why he kept insisting that Prime Minister Roosevelt Scabbard should not send him back to Antigua. He should send him straight to India. And he has been back in Antigua for so long. And Mr. Gaston Brong cannot send him to India? Something is not right. Okay.
Good observation. Very good observation. Lambi, you want to take some more calls?
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Yes, let me call again, I'll be very brief. Mr. G,
Yeah.
I'm listening to the program a long time, right? And I've observed that you are very careful, and you have all the reason to do that, because even if you saying something that is the truth, they'll try to sue your radio station. But the other day, I listened to a guy saying the magistrate them corrupt, and you said you haven't got the evidence, which I understand. But Mr. G, if a man who's not a Dominican had 7 charges for guns and ammunition, and just because the police did not ask him whether he had a license, he walked away. He pleaded guilty, and Lord have mercy, and he walked away free as a free man. This can show us as members of the public that something is wrong with the court system. Because I watched Scott Peterson court case, and I was on the defense side. But when I realized that the man have a pregnant wife, just about to deliver, and the man left his wife and goes miles away to fish, and the same place he said he went to fish, that's where they found the lady's body remain. So that is clear that he killed the lady. So I say this to say I am observing that you have to protect your radio station, but really and truly, we as members of the public, we can see without any shadow of doubt that this country we're living in, every area of it, every aspect of it is corrupt. Good night.
And thanks a lot for that contribution. Thanks a lot. You want to take some more calls? All right. So let me just do this. Gabriel, and Dr. Dion George, maybe I'll go to you first, Dr. Dion George, because, you started the ball rolling on this there. You put it in context for us. When you look at all of the evidence, all of the information that has come out tonight, what are your real thoughts? What are your concerns about the state of our governance, the state of our democracy? What are your concerns that today, why are we so passive? We're not reacting and responding to things that are sound, that they are right. When we hear that a man is in custody and tells us that I've been kidnapped and I've been beaten and tortured, and the police say that they deny him legal representation because he said he was tortured or beaten or kidnapped or whatever. What does that say about us? What does that say about the state of law in our country?
Excellent, Mr. Gregoire. And you're right. I think tonight, all of the panelists put this thing, this whole Choksy thing into perspective. And I think one of the perspective is an international one, that Dominica does not exist in a vacuum by itself. That after all, the world is looking, and as you saw from some of the presentations tonight, there are international organizations that are looking into that. There are other countries that are looking into that. And so with a response to your question directly, I mentioned earlier with the litany of issues that keep coming up on the international stance, including the Syria issue of diplomacy. Even if we think about the elections, where of course a village was bombarded, and when we are thinking now about this international kidnap and abduction where Dominica is involved, So it's, not forgetting the lack thereof of electoral reform, which are most needed and which has been, directed by the international observers. Well, you ask me, I mean, you're talking about the rule of law. In fact, if you were to go to Google and Google abduction and transnational law, there is one of the links that says that it has no boundaries, no borders, and no rule of law. That's a unique definition of what that is. And so I think there's no other way to say it, that we are entering in real deep waters. And so I will end with this, that there was a person who asked, I think Benjamin Franklin, what kind of government did you give us, sir? And his answer was this: I gave you a democracy if you can maintain it. And what that means is we cannot expect the quote unquote government to do the things that we need to do. It's really the people that has to agitate, that has to inform, and that has to do what we are doing there, educate, and to discuss, and to petition the government to do the right thing. And so they would have to listen. Ultimately, governance means that they work for the people, not the other way. And so when the people have concerns of laws where one person who may be a citizen of another country, but because of our OECS and CARICOM Association of States, have certain rights, for example, the right to an attorney, and these rights are being denied, undoubtedly, it's a concern that should be dealt with. And of course, in a civil society, these things ought to be dealt with in the courts. Thank you.
Lennox, as I go to you for your sort of a final and closing remarks, I mean, we started up this conversation here tonight, and we first looked at the whole question of the impact of the meaning of that May 29 event. And we did indicate that if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're liable to repeat them as we go along. In other words, we have to be guided by our history. And that is why we all agreed that we need to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to establish all of the events and the circumstances, and then make recommendations going forward so that we don't repeat those mistakes. But when you look at the proliferation of evidence and information that has come out here tonight that we've all talked about, where are we in all of this, Lennox? And I mean, are we now gone to the point? I mean, look, listen, let's face it, here's where we've been through. And you mentioned some of them earlier. You mentioned we had some rogue ambassadors, right? We somehow they got their hands on diplomatic passports, crooks and criminals. Some of them went to jail, right? But they got their hands on our passport. We have graduated now to where people are thinking, are we involved in international kidnapping? And Dr. Dion George gave us some very, very good definitions of all of those terms. And when you look at the evidence, the preponderance of evidence that you yourself brought here, from what your knowledge and the documents that you're reading from, these are state police documents and evidence presented by the police. And you listen to the words of the victim himself, Mr. Mayo Choksi. And then when we hear that the Antigua police, from where the man was abducted, they are corroborating his claim that he was in fact kidnapped and brought to Dominica against his will. And then that is followed, 1 year later or something, or whatever period it was in time later, that the DPP now says, I did not agree with that before. So I was going to hold him on this charge, but for some reason now, I agree that we should dismiss this charge and let him go back to Antigua. Give us sort of your thoughts and closing remarks on some of those now. You want to open your mic, huh? Your mic is muted. We're still not hearing you because your mic is
I was.
Okay.
I was having some difficulty finding the mute button because I was switched to some other things. But let me be clear, Sheridan, that I, Lennox Linton, at this point in time, the political leader of the United Workers' Party, the member of parliament for the Marigot constituency, and the leader of the opposition in the parliament of Dominica, I have been the subject of threats that I should disappear, threats against my life, threats made by ministers of government inciting their supporters to disappear me. I've been the victim of a criminal trespass on my property by mercenaries from England acting for and on behalf of the Dominica Labour Party in a plot to have me convicted for high crimes and misdemeanors. I've been the victim of a scheme by the Prime Minister and his attorney to have me jailed for releasing his confidential filing with the IPO to the public, which is a criminal offense that could have landed me in prison. It was found that it was Anthony Astafan, the lawyer for the Prime Minister himself, who disclosed the Prime Minister's information to a third party, and they were plotting and scheming to have me take the hit for what Astafan had done. And when the police investigation found that Astafan was in fact the one guilty of the criminal action they were trying to pin on me, they dropped the matter like it was hot potatoes. So I am the same Lennox Linton tonight who is saying to you, to the members of the panel, and to the people of Dominica at home and abroad, that the evidence I see, the evidence before me, in testimonies from officers of law enforcement in Dominica before the court, and what I have seen of the police investigation in Antigua, that evidence suggests to me that the government of Dominica is involved in kidnapping, abduction of people and holding them against their will. And let me indicate that I was with Danny Lugay when he was abducted by police in Mont Daniel. I was with him. I witnessed it. I saw it live. He was kidnapped by the police in Mont Daniel on the public road in the vicinity of the official residence of the Prime Minister. He is the duly elected parliamentary representative for the constituency of Roseau North, which includes Mont Daniel, and he was kidnapped on the road by police officers because he was in the vicinity of the Prime Minister's residence. I was there. And so I can say that I've seen an abundance of evidence of the government's involvement in abduction, in forced disappearance, in torture, in forced transfer, in receiving humans trafficked from one part of the globe to another, all crimes against humanity. And so this is not a simple matter. We cannot just let this one go. It cannot just end here. It's a matter of extreme importance to the people of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and we should not allow it to be swept on the carpet by the withdrawal of the illegal entry charge against Mr. Choksi, which is the right thing to do because it was bogus in the first place. But we must get to the bottom of this, and we must ensure that justice is done. Unfortunately, this is not a matter in which we can seek resolution from a local legal system or law enforcement system that justifies each and every act of ruling party criminality, nor can we depend on appropriate action, appropriate corrective action from a president who functions with a moral code that glorifies the high crimes and misdemeanors of the scared regime. And so this is left to us. We have to find a way to get this matter into the hands of international law enforcement and international justice systems, even if it means the International Criminal Court of Justice in The Hague, even if it means complaints to the government of India, complaints to the government of Britain, from where the suspects in the kidnap appear to have come, even if it means complaints to investigating agencies around the world like the FBI, the Scotland Yard. We have to bring this matter to the full attention of the heads of government of the CARICOM and the heads of government of the OECS. We cannot just let this slide, because in the words of Charles Sovereign from 1979, we have a situation on our hands where the government, by its actions, now represent a clear and present danger to Dominica and a danger to the region as a whole.
And Attorney Gabriel Christian, thank you for that, Lennox Linton. Attorney Gabriel Christian, it seems to me, and I think to all of us, that we are experiencing a crisis of governance, a major crisis of governance. And what adds to that, in fact, and is of even greater concern, is that every effort is being made to have continuance of that type of conduct. Why do I say that? Because we know many years ago, a famous email was sent, I think, to the Prime Minister, which says that there's madness going on at the Electoral Commission.
Madness.
And if madness is going on there, and if they're allowed to go ahead with that madness, you will lose your winning legacy. And so, Gabriel Christian, it seems as though every effort is being made, continually being made, to ensure that we maintain that type of governance. The reason why we're having this information and this education and these forums and these programs is to provide the edification of people so that they can understand that it does not have to be so. We had a lecture series, the history of the political leaders. We went from Frank Barron to Edward Leblanc, right? To Patrick John, to Oliver Seraphin, to Edison James, to Pierre Charles, to Rosie Douglas, and then to Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt. He did not accept our invitation to come in person to discuss his legacy. And it's unfortunate. We're sorry we didn't have that opportunity to speak with him on these issues. But certainly, Attorney Gabriel Christian, it has to be of some concern to us when the world is watching, and when the Antigua police say that there is an issue there, and our Dominica police seem to be saying something contrary to that in the face of the preponderance of evidence in the country. Gabriel, your final words?
Democracy dies in the darkness. Democracy dies in the darkness. And so at this moment, I just want to thank Brother Lennox, who has undergone many vicissitudes, sacrifices, himself and his family, to stand up for our country. I want to give thanks to him. I want to give thanks to Brother Dion George, who takes time out of his busy schedule as a professor at several universities in the Atlanta area to pay attention to his land of birth. See, I want to address my friends in the United States, several of whom rather, were involved in the diabolical practice of breaching our electoral laws by taking a gratuity, that is an airline ticket or air fare paid by agents of the government to go home to vote. When they know in the United States, Roosevelt Skerritt and his cabinet could not be elected to be dog catchers in a small town with the record that they've exhibited. Not because of what Lennox has said or what I've said or whatever, but look at the record. Look at the record of lack of transparency. Look at the record with regard to the passport program. Look at the record with regard to the missing funds. Look at the record with regard to the misconduct of the police, the treating and bribery scandal, the garbage bin ball. Democracy dies in the darkness. And so I want to thank you, Mr. G, for Q95. Because when we come on here, we don't engage in, castigating people, calling them names. We stick to the facts. We look at the conduct and we call out the conduct, not for political advantage, but to say that if we're going to be taken seriously as a people, we have to be concerned about our affairs. We have to exhibit a degree of civic responsibility. We have to be compliant with civic duty. Nobody's going to do that for us. In the United States, you have the American Civil Liberties Union. You have the National Lawyers Guild. You have the National Bar Association. You have the American Bar Association. You have the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. You have the Urban League. On and on and on. American democracy is guarded by a bodyguard of civic organizations. Among the businessmen, you have the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis, the Lions Club. All of these organizations exist to be watchdogs, to ensure that the government does right, to investigate. The Watergate scandal. The Watergate scandal is a classic example when Richard Nixon used agents to burglarize the Watergate, which is where the Democratic Party had its headquarters, to steal their files, see who their donors were, see who their secret supporters were, to bug their phones. Nixon had to resign. I was at grammar school at the time in first form. I didn't know what Watergate was. I thought it was really a gate holding back water. It was actually a hotel. I thought it was a gate holding back water. But two reporters of the Washington Post blew the whole thing sky high and changed the course of history. Mr. Kalai John Baptist, sir, are you listening? Matt Peltier, Loftus Duran, and all the other intrepid reporters, please take note. Do not underestimate the importance of your work. Do not underestimate the importance of asking probing questions. Don't go on a program and say, yes, I see. That's true. Boy, yes, I see, boy. That's a good one, boy. Yes. Be a little more skillful than that. Give yourself some more credit. Don't be a parrot on radio, allowing a man to come and bloviate and bludgeon, like with a blunt instrument, the sensibilities of our people by calling them names when he skirts the truth and he could not recognize it, even if it slapped him in the face with a mailed fist. Yes, let us honor Q95 this evening by when we walk out tomorrow into the bright uplands of a Dominican day, we respect the work of the freedom walkers. We join them. We join them not for political advantage because we're UWP or Freedom Party or UPP or APP or no P at all, but we join them because we care about our country. We join them because we care about justice. We join them because democracy dies in the darkness. And what we're seeking to do is illuminate the ills of our society so we can devise a cure that will allow for us to live better lives in our country as respected people, as competent people, as dignified people, as intelligent people, because it is unintelligent to allow a government to brew you, bamboozle you, and mislead you into ruin, which is where we've been led now. And so, as I conclude this evening, I just want to honor all my fellow panelists, Brother Lennox, Brother Dion, Mr. G, being an outstanding host as always, Brother Lambie at Master Control. And I want to send a challenge out to all those Dominicans who took that ride on the caravan of the damned to place this government over us. Ask yourself, those of you in the U.S. Virgin Islands, in the French territories, whether in the territories where you've been forced to flee for economic sustenance, whether the kind of behavior that is ruining Dominica would be allowed to proceed unimpeded. It would not, and you know it. And yet you shamelessly stay where you are and give succor and support to the rot that is destroying the country where we were born, where the countries that you are in are sustained because they have a tendency towards democracy, a tendency towards rule of law, a tendency towards transparency, and that the government we have in Dominica, had they to change locations and to be in the British Virgin Islands, for instance, they would now be looking at indictment.
And thank you so much for that, Brother Gabriel Christian. I want to also honor all of the panelists here tonight, and Lambi and Sherwin, but I also want to honor and reach out to lots of folks who are still with us on Facebook. And I still see here Celia Gordon, I see Alroy Phillip, I see Stephanie John Baptist, I see Everlasting Peter, I see Kelly Christian, I see Mali Austri, I see John Alfred and Hermin LeBlanc, and I see, let's see who else is here with us. I see Juanita Prince, I see again Catherine George and Kelly Christian, and you know, there's a lot of folks here, Jess Viville, and Lyndon George, and Shirley Phillip. Let me see, I don't want to miss out any names if I can. You know, Antoine George, Didi Easter, Hermin LeBlanc. I see Catherine George again here, and it's well, let's see some more here, but lots of people. Mali Austri still there, and Catherine. Okay, so there's many people who've been with us. David Joseph is still there with us, Elizabeth Nelson, and so on. Marley Marshall Lawrence, I want to thank all of you really for being with us tonight. I hope some of what we said tonight made some sense to you and that you took something away from it. We can see obviously that our little democracy is in peril. We have a crisis of governance. Our image is really being tarnished out there if we're going to be associated with that kind of conduct. It's clear, and as one person sent me a little note on WhatsApp, let me just read it. It says, the alleged abduction of Choksi now being investigated by Scotland Yard under British Universal Jurisdiction law. A person who is accused of an offense involving torture, even living abroad, can be arrested and prosecuted in the UK, and that means all those involved can be interrogated by Scotland Yard. Now, clearly, the police in Antigua is saying we want to come down and interview people because we think there's a serious problem here. But, gentlemen, you know, every good thing must come to an end, and this is where we have to end it. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you. I mean, Opposition Leader Lennox Linton is also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Gabriel Christian and Dr. Dion.
Thank you.
And also Dr. Irvin Andre, who was supposed to be with us, but I know he's got caught up in some things. He couldn't make it. So we'll talk to him tomorrow. I hope he had an opportunity to listen. And so thank you for all of those of you who've been listening on social media on Q95, live everywhere, in every nook and cranny in Dominica, in every community. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Until Tuesday night, next Tuesday night, we'll be coming back to you with another topic on the Global View on Q. So thanks a lot and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
God bless.
All right.
God bless.
All right, Gabu and Lambi. Take care, Dion George.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean Nature Islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad.